Syrian Economy by Jacob Rankin. The population of Syria is 22,457,336. Syria borders Turkey to the north, Jordan and Lebanon to the south, Iraq to the east, and the Mediterranean Sea to the west. Syria's top three exports are crude oil, minerals, and petroleum products. Syria's top three imports are machinery and transport equipment, electric power machinery, and also food and livestock. Syria imports 10.83 billion Syrian pounds and exports 6.33 billion Syrian pounds, which would make their trade deficit 4.50 Syrian pounds, which is actually a rather large trade deficit for a country of their size. The gross domestic product of Syria is 66.28 million Syrian pounds. Agriculture takes up about 25% of their GDP. It also employs about 25% of Syria's total labor force. Syria's national debt is 44% of their GDP, which equals 29.16 million Syrian pounds. The unemployment rate in Syria is 18%. Just to give you an idea of how much that is, the United States has an unemployment rate of 8%. Even though it is not known the exact rate, that is a rough figure. That will give you an idea of just how high the unemployment rate in Syria actually is. The standard of living in Syria. The cost of living is 59. The economy is also 59. And their final score out of 100% is 50. This means they have a 50%, which is by school standards an F as a country. Syria's top three trading partners. In third place, it is Kuwait, who they do 6.1% of their trades with. In second is Saudi Arabia with nearly 10%. In a heavy first, it's Iraq with 55.9% of their trades going to Iraq. The trade advantages of Syria. As we learned earlier, crude oil is one of Syria's top three exports. Even though it is one of their top three exports, it is not an absolute advantage. It is a comparative advantage because they produce less than 0.2% of the world's total each year. We also learned that minerals in Syria are one of their top three exports. Just like crude oil, minerals are a comparative advantage because they don't have an absolute advantage on the world. The country produces about 1.5% of the world's supply of phosphate rock annually. The last of the three top exports for Syria are petroleum products. Just like minerals and crude oil, this is a comparative advantage, which means Syria does not have any absolute advantages on the world. They transport around 1.4 million barrels of petroleum a day. Syria has many trade barriers with the world, but some of the trade barriers that it has with the U.S., they actually have three specific sanctions with Syria. The first and most comprehensive sanction is called the Syria Accountability Act of 2004. This act prohibits the export of most goods containing more than 10% of U.S. manufactured component parts to Syria. Another sanction was levied specifically against the Commercial Bank of Syria in 2006. The third sanction specifically denies certain Syrian citizens and entitles access to the U.S. financial system due to their participation and proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, association with Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, or Osama bin Laden. The EU, the European Union, is an economic and political union of 28 members and states that are located primarily in Europe. The EU have put restrictive measures, and these measures have made a significant impact on the bilateral trade in Syria. Syria and the European Union have a pretty good relationship in trading or importing and exporting, because the EU was Syria's first trading partner. In recent years, Syria and the EU have negotiated an association agreement, but due to the internal situation, the civil war within the country, the EU, the main part of the agreement, has been put on hold by the EU. But in 2012, the EU exports consisted mainly of machinery and transport equipment, ag equipment, and chemicals. The EU imports from Syria that year were mainly energy products and textiles and clothing. The three questions: what to produce, how to produce, and for whom to produce. First, we are going to look at what to produce. Earlier on in the presentation, we learned that Syria's main exports are petroleum products, crude oil, and minerals. But also, to add to those, they also produce fruits and vegetables, cotton fiber, clothing, textiles, meat and live animals, and they do a heavy export of wheat as well. How to produce. Just like in any country that produces crude oil, there have to be locations within the country where they get this oil drills and wells. Even though there are a number of smaller fields in the center of the country, most of the known oil reserves are mainly in the eastern part of the country, where the country, or near the country's border with Iraq and along the Euphrates River. Earlier in the presentation, we learned about the top three trading partners of Syria, which are Iraq, being a heavy favorite, Saudi Arabia, and Kuwait. Saudi Arabia with about 9% and Kuwait with about 6%. However, they do trades with a lot of other countries, even though they do have issues with some countries like the United States. But they do a lot of trading within the Middle East with countries like United Arab Emirates and Lebanon. The currency within Syria is actually called the Syrian pound. It is basically the same thing as the British pound. They just call it something different. $1 US equals 0.62 Syrian pounds. The standard abbreviation for the Syrian pound is capital SYP. As we learned in the last slide, $1 US is equal to 0.639914 Syrian pounds. Or just 0.63 Syrian pounds. So say you take a trip to Syria, which probably wouldn't happen, but if you did, and you're walking around the streets and you want a pomegranate juice, this would cost you 70 cents in US dollars, or just 0.43 Syrian pounds. And then you realize you're hungry, so why not have a lunch for two in a cafe? This would cost you anywhere from $3.50 to $4.90 in US dollars, or anywhere from $2.16 to $3.02 in Syrian pounds. And then your sweet tooth comes around and you want a cake. So you go and you find a bakery and you find a cake, and this would cost you anywhere from 20 cents to 30 cents in US dollars, or 0.12 or 0.19 Syrian pounds. And then it's been a long day, so you need a hotel stay. This would cost you one night stay in a decent hotel would cost you anywhere from, or actually it would cost you $25.40 in US dollars, or 15.7 in Syrian pounds.